A homeless mother watched helplessly as her daughter burned with fever on the cold streets. When a passing millionaire heard her desperate prayer, he discovered a truth that changed both their lives forever. Sarah Johnson's hands trembled as she pressed them against her daughter's burning forehead. The cold dawn air bit through her thin jacket, and the cardboard walls of their makeshift shelter did little to block the wind whistling through the Bronx alley. "Mama, it hurts," 6-year-old Lisa whimpered, her small body shivering despite the fever. "Shuh, baby. Try to rest." Sarah's voice cracked as she tucked the only blanket tighter around Lisa's shoulders. The other children, 12-year-old Tanya and 8-year-old Marcus, huddled closer, their breath visible in the morning air. Tanya's eyes met her mother's. "She's getting worse." Sarah swallowed hard, fighting back tears. The street lights were just beginning to fade, marking the start of another desperate day. She had to move, had to find help, but leaving her sick child felt impossible. "Tanya, you know what to do while I'm gone?" Sarah asked, though they'd been through this routine countless times. The girl nodded, her face too serious for her age. "Keep Lisa warm. Make sure Marcus stays close. Don't talk to strangers. If the police come, go to Miss Martha's store and wait for me there," Sarah finished. She kissed each child's forehead, lingering an extra moment on Lisa's burning skin. Standing up, Sarah's muscles protested from sleeping on concrete. She grabbed her worn cleaning supplies, a nearly empty bottle of generic cleaner, and some ragged rags. These tools were all that stood between her children and complete destitution. "There's half a bread loaf in the bag," Sarah said, pointing to their plastic shopping bag of possessions. "Make it last." The morning traffic was picking up as Sarah stepped onto the sidewalk. Early commuters rushed past, eyes deliberately avoiding the woman in stained clothes. She'd become invisible to them, just another shadow in the city's margins. Her first cleaning job was 10 blocks away, Mrs. Peterson's brownstone. The wealthy woman paid less than minimum wage, but didn't ask questions about papers or backgrounds. Today, Sarah would have to ask for an advance. The thought made her stomach churn. "Please, just let her say yes," Sarah whispered to herself. The morning progressed with mechanical movements, scrubbing floors, wiping windows, dusting shelves. Her body worked while her mind stayed with Lisa. Every cough she'd heard this morning played on repeat in her head. "Mrs. Peterson?" Sarah called softly, finding the woman in her home office. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I've told you not to interrupt me during work hours." Mrs. Peterson cut her off, not looking up from her computer. "My daughter's sick. She needs medicine. If I could just get an advance on next week." "That's not my problem." Mrs. Peterson's fingers continued typing. "You're already paid more than market rate. If you're unsatisfied, I can find someone else." Sarah's throat tightened. "No, ma'am. I'm sorry for bothering you." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of cleaning products and rejection. 2 more houses, 2 more negative responses to her desperate requests for advances. By early afternoon, Sarah's feet dragged as she approached their alley. The sun had risen higher, but the November air remained bitter. A man in an expensive suit walked past, his leather shoes clicking on the pavement. Sarah noticed him glance their way before quickening his pace. "Mama!" Marcus ran to her as she rounded the corner. Lisa won't stop coughing. Sarah dropped her supplies and rushed to their shelter. Lisa lay curled on her side, her breathing raspy and irregular. Tanya sat beside her, holding her hand with tears streaming down her face. "I tried to make her drink water," Tanya said, "but she kept saying her throat hurts too much." Sarah gathered Lisa into her arms, feeling the heat radiating through the little girl's clothes. "Baby, can you open your eyes for Mama?" Lisa's eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that made Sarah's heart stop. "We need to get her to a hospital," Sarah said, standing with Lisa in her arms. Tanya grabbed Marcus's hand. "Stay close." The emergency room was 8 blocks away. Sarah had made this walk 3 times in the past week, only to be turned away each time. But Lisa's breathing was worse now, her small chest heaving with each breath. As they walked, the sun began to set. The temperature dropped further, and the wind picked up, carrying the first few snowflakes of the season. Sarah pulled Lisa closer, trying to shield her from the cold. "Please," she whispered, her words carried away by the wind. Please don't take her too. Not like Mama. I can't lose anyone else. The hospital's bright lights came into view just as darkness settled over the city. Sarah's arms ached from carrying Lisa, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when her baby's breath was getting shallower by the minute. Through the emergency room doors, the stark fluorescent lights revealed the true pallor of Lisa's skin. A nurse looked up from the reception desk, recognition crossing her face. "Mrs. Johnson," the nurse said, her voice tired. "We've been through this. Without insurance or ability to pay. She's dying." Sarah's voice echoed through the waiting room. Other patients turned to stare. "My baby is dying, and you're talking about money?" Security guards started moving their way. Sarah saw Tanya pull Marcus behind her, saw the fear in their eyes. The same fear she felt every day, every hour, every minute since they'd ended up on the streets. "Please," Sarah said again, but this time she wasn't sure who she was begging, the nurse, the guards, or God himself. "Please help my baby." Lisa stirred in her arms, letting out a weak cough that seemed to rattle her entire body. The nurse's expression softened slightly as she reached for the phone. "I'll see if Dr. Martinez is available," she said quietly. "But Mrs. Johnson, you need to understand, we can't keep providing free care. There are rules." Sarah nodded, tears finally breaking free. "Thank you. Thank you." As they waited, Sarah sank into a plastic chair, still cradling Lisa. Tanya and Marcus pressed against her sides, forming a tight family unit in the corner of the sterile waiting room. Around them, life continued. Nurses rushed past, phones rang, other patients came and went. The man in the expensive suit walked through the doors, his pace purposeful. Sarah recognized him from earlier, but now his presence seemed different. He paused, looking their way, and for a moment, their eyes met. In that brief connection, Sarah saw something unexpected. Not pity or disgust, but recognition. Then the moment passed, and he continued to the reception desk. Sarah turned her attention back to Lisa, unaware that this chance encounter would soon change everything. Outside, the snow fell harder, covering the city in a deceptive blanket of white. Another night approached, bringing with it the same fears and uncertainties that had become Sarah's constant companions. But tonight felt different. Tonight, everything hung on the edge of change, though whether for better or worse, only time would tell. Sarah closed her eyes and did the only thing left to do. She prayed. Dr. Martinez had given Lisa some medicine for the fever, but Sarah couldn't afford the prescription he'd written. She stood outside Mrs. Davidson's three-story house the next morning, her body heavy with exhaustion. This cleaning job paid better than the others, enough to maybe buy Lisa's medicine if she worked extra hours. The windows on the third floor needed washing. Sarah's hands shook as she climbed the ladder, her back still sore from carrying Lisa last night. The metal rungs felt icy against her palms. "Just get through this," she whispered, reaching for the window with her cleaning rag. The ladder shifted. Sarah's stomach lurched as her foot slipped. For a moment, she hung suspended in air. Then gravity took over. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Pain shot through her spine, sharp and immediate. Above her, the winter sky spun in lazy circles. "Oh my God!" Mrs. Davidson's voice seemed to come from far away. "Don't move. I'm calling an ambulance." "No." Sarah tried to sit up, but her body screamed in protest. "No ambulance. Please. I can't afford. Don't be ridiculous. You could be seriously injured." Sarah forced herself to stand, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I'm fine. Just give me a minute." Mrs. Davidson's face hardened. "I can't have this liability. I'm sorry, but I don't think you should come back until you've seen a doctor." "Mrs. Davidson, please. My daughter's sick. I need this job. I'm sorry. I'll mail your final check." The walk back to their alley took twice as long. Each step sent spikes of pain through Sarah's lower back. By the time she reached their shelter, tears streamed down her face. Tanya took one look at her mother and knew something was wrong. What happened? Just a little fall. Sarah eased herself down onto their makeshift bed of flattened cardboard. "Where are your brother and sister?" "Marcus is watching Lisa behind the dumpster. She started throwing up, and I didn't want people seeing." Sarah tried to stand, but her back seized. A small cry escaped her lips. "Mama!" Tanya's voice trembled. "Should I get help?" "No, baby. Just help me up." Together, they made their way to where Marcus sat with Lisa. The little girl lay curled against a brick wall, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "The medicine's wearing off," Marcus said. His small face was pinched with worry. Sarah touched Lisa's forehead. The fever had returned. They needed money for the prescription, but now with her back injury, "Tanya, watch them. I need to try something." The social services office was housed in a gray building with flickering fluorescent lights. Sarah waited 3 hours in an uncomfortable plastic chair before someone called her name. "Mrs. Johnson." The caseworker didn't look up from her computer. "This is your 3rd visit this month. My situation's changed. I had an accident at work, and my daughter's sick. Do you have medical documentation of your injuries?" "No, but—" "Proof of employment?" Sarah's throat tightened. "I was cleaning houses. Cash jobs." "Mrs. Johnson." The caseworker finally looked at her. "Without proper documentation, there's nothing I can do. Have you considered— I'm not putting my children in the system." Sarah's voice came out sharper than intended. "They need to stay together. They need their mother. Then I suggest you find legitimate employment with proper documentation." The memory of her mother's final days hit Sarah as she left the office. The endless paperwork. The denied claims, watching cancer eat away at the woman who'd raised her while bureaucrats debated coverage. She'd sold everything then: her car, her furniture, even her mother's wedding ring. The medical bills had still kept coming. Now here she was, in the same situation with her own daughter. Back in the alley, Tanya sat alone, hugging her knees to her chest. Sarah's heart stopped. "Where are Marcus and Lisa?" "Some cops came by." Tanya's voice was barely a whisper. "They said we couldn't stay here. Marcus got scared and ran with Lisa. I told them to go to Miss Martha's store." Sarah found them huddled in the store's back room. Miss Martha, the elderly owner, looked up as Sarah entered. "Child," she said softly, "you can't keep living like this. I don't have a choice." Sarah gathered her children close, wincing at the pain in her back. "Your girl's sick. You're hurt. Let me call my pastor. The church shelter has a 6-month waiting list. We already tried." That night, they found a new spot behind an abandoned warehouse. The wind howled through broken windows, carrying the promise of more snow. "I'm hungry," Marcus whispered. Sarah reached for their food bag, but Tanya stopped her. "We ate the last bread this morning." Lisa started coughing again, the sound wet and painful. Sarah pulled her closer, feeling the heat of her fever through their thin clothes. "Mama!" Tanya's voice cracked. "Are we going to die out here?" "No, baby." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "We're going to be okay." But her back throbbed, and Lisa's breathing grew more labored, and the night stretched endlessly ahead. Tomorrow, she'd have to find new cleaning jobs, though she could barely walk. Tomorrow, she'd have to find food, though they had no money. Tomorrow, she'd have to be stronger, though she felt broken in every way possible. A memory surfaced, her mother in the hospital bed, skeletal hands gripping Sarah's. "Promise me," her mother had whispered. "Promise you'll take care of them." "I promise, Mama." Now, holding her sick child in a frozen alley, Sarah wondered if she'd failed that promise. She'd tried so hard, worked every job she could find, stretched every dollar until it broke. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. "Mama!" Lisa's voice was faint. "Can we go home?" Sarah closed her eyes against fresh tears. "Soon, baby. Soon." The next morning brought heavy rain. Sarah woke to water dripping through their cardboard roof. Their few possessions, including the folder containing their birth certificates and social security cards, lay in puddles. "No, no, no." Sarah grabbed the folder, but the documents inside had already turned to wet pulp. The ink ran in blue streams down the soggy papers. Tanya watched silently as Sarah tried to salvage what she could. Without these documents, they couldn't apply for housing assistance, couldn't enroll the children in school, couldn't do anything but sink deeper into the hole they were in. A cough from Lisa turned into a choking fit. Sarah crawled to her, helpless as her daughter struggled to breathe. "We need help," Tanya said. She sounded older than her 12 years. "Real help." Sarah looked at her children. Marcus shivering in his wet clothes, Lisa burning with fever, Tanya trying so hard to be brave. The rain fell harder, soaking through their last dry blanket. She thought of the man in the suit from the hospital. The way he'd looked at them, really looked at them, before walking away. She'd seen him again yesterday, passing their alley in his expensive car. Tomorrow, she said, more to herself than the children. Tomorrow I'll find a way. The rain continued to fall, washing away their shelter, their documents, their last pretense of managing on their own. Sometimes Sarah knew you had to break completely before you could begin to rebuild. She just prayed they'd survive the breaking. The storm intensified overnight. Wind howled through the warehouse district, turning their makeshift shelter into a wind tunnel. Sarah tried to shield her children with her body as debris flew past them. "We need to move," she shouted over the wind. "Tanya, help Marcus. I've got Lisa." They stumbled through the darkness, rain stinging their faces. Lisa felt like a burning coal in Sarah's arms, her fever refusing to break. Thunder cracked overhead, making Marcus jump. "There!" Tanya pointed to an overhanging loading dock. Its metal roof provided better shelter than their sodden cardboard. They huddled together under the overhang, watching their few possessions scatter in the wind. Sarah's back screamed in protest as she set Lisa down. "The documents," Tanya said suddenly. "Mama, the folder." Sarah's heart sank. In their rush to escape the storm, they'd left the folder of documents behind. She peered through the rain at their abandoned spot, barely visible now in the darkness. "Stay here," she told Tanya. "Keep them close." The wind nearly knocked her over as she fought her way back. Their cardboard shelter had collapsed, turning into a soggy mess. Sarah dropped to her knees, digging through the wet debris. Her fingers found the folder, but it was too late. The rain had turned their birth certificates, social security cards, and medical records into an unrecognizable pulp. Years of careful document preservation destroyed in a single night. A piece of mail caught her eye, still partially legible despite the water damage. It was addressed to her ex-husband's last known address in Georgia. Sarah squinted at the return address, county coroner's office. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. Most words had blurred, but a few phrases stood out. "Regret to inform you. Vehicular accident. Deceased. Dead." James was dead. The last person who might have helped them was gone. Sarah stayed on her knees in the rain. The useless papers clutched to her chest. A sob rose in her throat, but she forced it down. She couldn't break. Not now. Not when her children needed her. The loading dock came into view through the rain. 3 small figures huddled together, waiting for her. Sarah straightened her spine, ignoring the pain, and made her way back. "Everything's ruined," she said quietly, showing Tanya the remains of their documents. Tanya's face fell. "What do we do now?" Before Sarah could answer, Lisa started convulsing. Her small body jerked violently, eyes rolling back in her head. "No, no, no." Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms. "We need to get back to the hospital." "But they won't help us," Tanya said. "Not without money or documents." "They have to. She's dying." The emergency room was chaos when they arrived. A car accident had brought in multiple victims, and the waiting room overflowed with injured people. "Please," Sarah begged the receptionist. "My daughter's having seizures. She needs help now." The woman barely glanced up. "Take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." "You don't understand, ma'am. Everyone here needs help. Either wait your turn or leave." Lisa's body had stopped convulsing, but her breathing was shallow and irregular. Sarah found an empty corner and sank to the floor, cradling her daughter. "Mrs. Johnson." She looked up to see Dr. Martinez, the doctor from their previous visit. His face was grave. "Doctor, please. She had a seizure. Her fever won't break." He knelt beside them, checking Lisa's vital signs. "This is serious. She needs immediate treatment. I'll do anything. Please, follow me." He led them to an examination room, away from the chaos of the waiting area. "But Mrs. Johnson, I have to warn you. The hospital administration is watching these cases closely. Without insurance or ability to pay, they'll call social services," Sarah finished. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Dr. Martinez nodded. They're required to by law in cases like this. I can admit her tonight on emergency grounds, but tomorrow, Sarah watched as nurses hooked Lisa up to monitors and IVs. Each beep of the machines seemed to count down the hours they had left together. Mama, Marcus tugged at her sleeve. I'm scared. Everything's going to be okay. The lie felt heavy on her tongue. Why don't you and Tanya try to get some sleep? They curled up in plastic chairs while Sarah stood vigil by Lisa's bed. Outside the window, the storm continued to rage. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the parking lot below. A familiar car pulled up, the expensive black sedan she'd seen passing their alley. The man in the suit stepped out, shielding himself from the rain with an umbrella as he walked toward the hospital entrance. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool glass. What would it be like, she wondered, to have enough money that a hospital visit wasn't a catastrophe? To know your children would never go hungry or sleep in the rain? Mrs. Johnson? A nurse appeared in the doorway. Administration needs to speak with you about payment arrangements. Sarah's legs felt like lead as she followed the nurse down sterile corridors. Each step took her closer to the moment she'd been dreading, when they'd take her children away. The administration office was small and windowless. A woman in a business suit sat behind the desk, a stack of forms in front of her. Mrs. Johnson, I'll be direct. Your daughter needs extended care that this hospital cannot provide without payment or insurance. I have no choice but to notify Child Protective Services. How long? Sarah's voice cracked. How long do we have? A social worker will arrive in the morning to assess the situation. Given your current living conditions, the woman's voice trailed off meaningfully. Sarah thought of Tanya's brave face, Marcus's trust, Lisa's fever-bright eyes. They were all she had left in the world. The only reason she kept fighting. There must be something I can do. Unless you can provide proof of employment, stable housing, and ability to pay for medical care. The woman shook her head. The children will be placed in emergency foster care. Separately, most likely, given their different ages and medical needs. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Separately, they would split up her family. She stumbled back to Lisa's room, her vision blurring. Tanya and Marcus slept fitfully in their chairs. Lisa's monitors beeped steadily in the darkness. Through the window, Sarah saw the man in the suit exit the hospital. He paused under the overhang, looking up at the storm-dark sky. For a moment, she thought he looked directly at their window. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with her sleeping children and the weight of impossible choices. Morning would come too soon, bringing with it people who would tear her family apart. She had hours left, hours to find a miracle, hours to change their fate, hours to prove she could be the mother her children deserved. Sarah sank into a chair, her back throbbing, her heart heavier than the storm clouds outside. Sometimes rock bottom had a basement, and she just found it. But as she watched her children sleep, a desperate plan began to form. Tomorrow, she would find that man in the suit. Tomorrow, she would swallow her pride and ask for help. Tomorrow would be different. It had to be. Dawn broke over the hospital parking lot, painting the wet asphalt gold. Sarah hadn't slept, her eyes fixed on the entrance below. She'd memorized the man's schedule over the past few days. He arrived precisely at 7:30 a.m. Mama, Tanya stirred in her chair. Did the social workers come yet? Not yet, baby. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. I need you to watch Lisa and Marcus for a little while. Can you do that? Lisa's fever had finally broken during the night, but she remained hooked to the IVs, her breathing still labored. Marcus slept curled against her bed, his small face troubled even in sleep. You're going to try something? Aren't you? Tanya's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah knelt beside her eldest, ignoring her protesting back. I'm going to fix this. I promise. That's what you said when we lost the apartment. And when they turned off our electricity. And when, this time is different. Sarah cupped Tanya's face in her hands. Trust me one more time. Tanya's eyes, too old for her 12 years, searched her mother's face. Finally, she nodded. The hospital corridor was quiet at this hour, caught between night shift and morning rounds. Sarah made her way to the entrance, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the glass doors, she saw the black sedan turn into the parking lot. The man stepped out, briefcase in hand. Even after a night of rain, his suit looked immaculate. He walked with the confidence of someone who had never worried about his next meal. Sarah pushed through the doors. The morning air was crisp and clean after the storm. "Excuse me," she called, her voice stronger than she felt. "Sir?" He turned, recognition flickering across his face. "Yes. My name is Sarah Johnson. I've seen you passing by the alley where—" Her voice caught. "Where my children and I have been staying. I remember." His expression was unreadable. "I saw you in the emergency room last night. My daughter's sick. They're going to take my children away." The words tumbled out. "I know you don't know me, but I need help. Not money," she added quickly, seeing his expression shift. "A job. A chance. Anything." He studied her for a long moment. His name badge caught the morning light. "Richard Thompson, CEO, Thompson Industries." "Mrs. Johnson, I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired," Sarah interrupted. "I was a certified administrative assistant before everything happened. I can type, file, organize. I'll start at the bottom. Just please give me a chance." Mr. Thompson glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. "I understand." Sarah's hopes crumbled. "Thank you for listening." She turned to go, her shoulders heavy with defeat. "Wait." His voice stopped her. "Come to my office at 9. Bring your children. But the social workers. I'll handle it." He pulled out his phone. "Ninth floor, Thompson Industries. Don't be late." Sarah watched him walk away, her legs shaking. She barely remembered the journey back to Lisa's room. "Well," Tanya demanded as soon as she entered. "We have to be somewhere at 9. Sarah touched Lisa's forehead, still cool. "Think you can walk, baby girl?" Lisa nodded weakly. "Are we going somewhere good?" "I hope so." The next hour passed in a blur. Dr. Martinez arrived with discharge papers, frowning at the sudden change in administration's stance. A nurse removed Lisa's IVs with gentle hands. "Remember," Dr. Martinez said quietly, "she needs rest and continued antibiotics." Sarah nodded, adding another item to her mental list of debts and promises. They left the hospital just as a harried-looking woman with a social services badge arrived. Sarah hurried her children past, her heart racing until they were safely outside. Thompson Industries occupied a gleaming tower 20 blocks away. They walked slowly, supporting Lisa between them. The girl's fever might have broken, but she was still weak. "Mama," Marcus tugged at her sleeve, pointing up at the building. "Are we really going in there?" The lobby was all marble and glass, making Sarah acutely aware of their ragged appearance. The security guard frowned as they approached. "Can I help you?" "Sarah Johnson, to see Mr. Thompson." The guard's eyebrows rose, but he checked his computer. "Ninth floor. They're expecting you." The elevator ride was silent. Sarah tried to smooth her hair in the mirrored walls, but days of sleeping rough had left their mark. The ninth floor opened into a plush reception area. A woman in a crisp blazer looked up from her desk. "Mrs. Johnson, please wait here. Mr. Thompson will be with you shortly." They sank into soft leather chairs. Marcus ran his hand over the armrest in wonder. Even Tanya's rigid posture relaxed slightly in the comfortable seat. Sarah's back had begun to throb again when the reception door opened. Mr. Thompson emerged, followed by several men in expensive suits. "Gentlemen, we'll continue this discussion tomorrow." His tone was firm. Once they left, he turned to Sarah. "Come in, Mrs. Johnson. All of you." His office was larger than their old apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city stretching to the horizon. Sarah noticed Lisa's eyes widening at the sight. "Sit, please." Mr. Thompson gestured to chairs arranged around a coffee table. "Would the children like something to drink? Susan can bring juice, water." "Juice?" Marcus perked up. Mr. Thompson pressed his intercom. "Susan, could you bring juice and snacks for our young guests?" Once they were settled with drinks and packaged cookies, he turned to Sarah. "Tell me your story, Mrs. Johnson. The real story." Sarah looked at her children, Tanya watching everything with suspicious eyes, Marcus happily munching cookies, Lisa curled in her chair, looking so fragile. "A year ago, my mother got sick. Cancer." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "We had some savings, but the medical bills—" She swallowed hard. "I sold everything trying to save her. Our car, our furniture, even our apartment. But she's still... I'm sorry for your loss. His voice was gentle. After she died, I couldn't find steady work. No one wants to hire someone without a permanent address. We stayed in shelters when we could, but they separate men and boys from women. I couldn't split up my family. And their father? Dead? Sarah's voice cracked. I just found out yesterday. Car accident in Georgia. Mr. Thompson was silent for a long moment. You said you were a certified administrative assistant? Yes, sir, I worked for an insurance company before all this. I can provide references. She stopped, remembering their ruined documents. That won't be necessary. He stood, walking to the window. Mrs. Johnson, I'm going to be direct. Your situation touches me personally. I was homeless myself once as a child. Sarah's head snapped up in surprise. My mother worked 3 jobs trying to keep us off the streets, he continued. One person gave her a chance. That's all she needed. He turned back to them. I'm prepared to offer you a job in our administrative pool. Entry level, but with benefits including health insurance. There's also a company housing program for employees in need. The room spun slightly. Sarah gripped her chair arms. Mr. Thompson, don't thank me yet. This won't be easy. You'll need to prove yourself. And there will be people who don't think you belong here. I understand. He nodded. Susan will help you with the paperwork. We'll need to sort out new copies of your documents, but I have some contacts who can expedite that. He looked at Lisa. And I'll have my personal physician check on your daughter this afternoon. Sarah felt tears threatening. Why are you doing this? Because 20 years ago, someone did it for my mother. He smiled slightly. Sometimes we all need a hand up. The children were quiet as they left the office, but Sarah felt their excitement bubbling beneath the surface. In her hand, she clutched papers promising a new future, employment contracts, housing forms, medical care authorizations. Mama, Tanya's voice was hesitant. Is this real? Sarah pulled her daughter close. Yes, baby. This is real. As they waited for Susan to process their paperwork, Sarah watched the city through the 9th floor windows. Somewhere down there was their abandoned alley, their wet cardboard, their old life. Up here, in the warmth and safety of the building, tomorrow finally looked different. It looked like hope. The Thompson Industries employee housing turned out to be a modest 2-bedroom apartment 10 blocks from the office. Sarah stood in the empty living room, keys cold in her palm, while her children explored every corner. Mama, we have a bathroom. Marcus called from down the hall. With hot water. Look at the kitchen. Lisa's voice was stronger already. The doctors prescribed antibiotics working their magic. Can we really cook here? Tanya stood by the window, arms crossed. What's the catch? Tanya, Sarah started. No, really? Rich people don't just help people like us. What does he want? A knock at the door interrupted Sarah's response. Susan, Mr. Thompson's assistant, stood in the hallway with several shopping bags. Some essentials to get you started, she said, setting the bags down. Mr. Thompson thought you might need them. The bags contained bedding, towels, basic kitchen supplies, and Sarah's throat tightened. New clothes for everyone. Please thank him for us, she managed. Susan's professional smile softened slightly. Be in the office at 8 a.m. sharp tomorrow. And Mrs. Johnson, she hesitated. Some of the other employees, they might not be very welcoming at first. Just focus on your work. After Susan left, Sarah unpacked the bags while her children explored their new home. The clothes were simple, but good quality. She ran her fingers over a soft blue sweater meant for Lisa, remembering how the little girl had shivered in their cardboard shelter. Can we really stay here? Marcus asked, hugging a new pillow to his chest. Yes, baby. This is our home now. That night, they slept on blankets on the floor, but no one complained. The heating worked, the roof didn't leak, and they were together. Sarah lay awake, listening to her children's steady breathing, until dawn painted the empty walls gold. The Thompson Industries office buzzed with morning activity when Sarah arrived. She'd dressed in her new clothes, her hair neatly pulled back, but still felt the stares of other employees. Mrs. Johnson. Susan appeared at her elbow. Let me show you to your desk. The administrative pool occupied a large open space on the 7th floor. Dozens of cubicles stretched in neat rows, filled with the sound of typing and quiet conversations. This is your station, Susan said, gesturing to a cubicle. Login information is in the envelope. Martha from HR will be by shortly for orientation. The whispers started as soon as Susan left. That's her. The homeless woman Thompson hired. Did you see the state of her children in the lobby yesterday? I heard she accosted him in the parking lot. Sarah focused on her computer screen, her fingers finding the familiar home row keys. How long had it been since she'd typed at a proper keyboard? The muscle memory remained, even if everything else felt foreign. Martha from HR turned out to be a brisk woman with cat-eye glasses who treated Sarah no differently than any other new hire. She walked her through benefits paperwork, email protocols, and basic procedures. Questions? Martha asked when they finished. No, Sarah stopped as Mr. Thompson appeared at her cubicle. How's everyone settling in? He asked quietly. The apartment is perfect, Sarah said. We can't thank you enough. Your daughter's feeling better? Yes, the doctor you sent was wonderful. He nodded, satisfied. Good. Susan will bring you your first assignment shortly. Remember what I said. You'll need to prove yourself here. As he walked away, Sarah felt the stares intensify. A woman in the next cubicle openly glared. Susan arrived with a stack of files. These need to be entered into the system and cross-referenced by end of day. Sarah dove into the work, letting the familiar rhythm of data entry calm her nerves. Numbers and letters flowed through her fingers, each completed file a small victory. At lunch, she found an empty break room table. She'd packed simple sandwiches for her children, but hadn't thought to bring anything for herself. Here, a granola bar landed on her table. The woman who'd thrown it, young, with bright red hair, gave her a quick smile. I'm Jenny. Data processing. Sarah. I know. Jenny sat down. Everyone knows. But not everyone knows you used to work in insurance. I saw your resume on Martha's desk. Sarah tensed. I did. Relax. I'm not here to judge. My mom. Jenny glanced around and lowered her voice. My mom was homeless for a while when I was a kid. After the divorce, we lived in our car. Sarah's shoulders eased slightly. How did you get out? Someone gave her a chance. Like Thompson gave you? Jenny stood. You'll catch up quick. And if anyone gives you trouble, I've got your back. The afternoon brought more work and more whispers. Sarah ignored them, focusing on each task with fierce determination. By 5 o'clock, she completed everything Susan had given her. These are perfect, Susan said, reviewing the files. Mr. Thompson will be pleased. Sarah's back ached from sitting upright all day, but it was a different kind of pain than the injury, more like muscles remembering how to work properly. The walk home felt shorter with a destination in mind. She climbed the stairs to their apartment, already hearing her children's voices through the door. Mama! Lisa ran to hug her. Miss Jenny from next door brought us dinner. Sarah looked at the covered casserole dish on their counter, then at her elderly neighbor who was teaching Marcus how to set the table. Hope you don't mind, Jenny's mother said. My daughter called, said you might need some help getting settled. They ate together, the neighbor sharing stories about raising Jenny alone while working 2 jobs. Sarah watched her children slowly relax, saw Tanya crack her first real smile in days. Later, after their neighbor left and the children were asleep on their blanket beds, Sarah sat by the window. The city lights sparkled below, so different from their view in the alley. Her phone, a basic model provided by the company, buzzed with a text from Jenny. You did good today. See you tomorrow. Sarah typed back a thank you, her throat tight with emotion. One person's trust had turned into 2, then 3. Small kindnesses building bridges over the gaps fear had created. A noise made her turn. Tanya stood in the doorway, watching her. Maybe, her daughter said softly, maybe this really is different. Sarah held out her arm, and Tanya came to sit beside her. Together, they watched the city lights and counted their blessings. A roof, warm beds, full stomachs, and most precious of all, hope. But in the back of Sarah's mind, a small voice whispered, don't get too comfortable. Don't let your guard down. The world had taken everything from them before. Who was to say it wouldn't happen again? She pushed the thoughts away and held her daughter closer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers to ignore, new things to prove. But tonight they were safe. Tonight they were home. And for now, that was enough. Sarah's 2 weeks at Thompson Industries passed in a blur of data entry and growing confidence. She arrived early each morning, worked through lunch, and stayed late to double-check her files. Her cubicle, once bare, now held a child's drawing, Lisa's bright crayon depiction of their new home. Mrs. Johnson. Susan's voice cut through the morning quiet. Mr. Thompson needs to see you. The whispers followed her to the elevator. In 2 weeks, they hadn't stopped, but they'd become background noise, like traffic or the hum of fluorescent lights. Mr. Thompson wasn't alone in his office. 5 people in expensive suits sat around his conference table, their expressions ranging from neutral to openly hostile. "Sarah, please join us." Mr. Thompson gestured to an empty chair. "The board has some questions about your position here." Sarah's stomach dropped, but she kept her face neutral as she sat down. A man with steel-gray hair cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson, we've been reviewing Mr. Thompson's unusual hiring decision. What Charles means," a woman in a red blazer cut in, "is that we're concerned about the precedent this sets. Hiring someone off the street, literally without proper vetting." With all due respect, Sarah's voice was steady. "I've completed every assignment given to me, on time and without errors." "That's not the point." Charles leaned forward. "This company has standards, procedures. We can't have people thinking they can just approach our CEO in parking lots and get jobs." "No," Sarah agreed. "They can't. But Mr. Thompson saw something in me worth taking a chance on. Because you have children." The woman in red made it sound like an accusation. "You played on his sympathies." Sarah's hands clenched under the table. "I asked for work, not sympathy. I've earned every minute of my time here. By living in company housing? Using company resources?" Another board member spoke up. "Do you know how many qualified candidates we turn away daily?" "I was qualified once." Sarah met their eyes one by one. "I had a career, a home, a normal life. Then my mother got sick." The room fell silent. "Cancer." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I sold everything trying to save her. But the bills kept coming. The insurance company, probably one like yours, kept denying claims. By the end, we had nothing left. Not even her." Mr. Thompson watched silently, his expression unreadable. "When you have children," Sarah continued, "you don't have the luxury of pride. You do what you have to do. Clean houses. Sleep in alleys. Beg hospitals to treat your sick daughter. And yes, approach strangers in parking lots." She pulled out a folded paper from her pocket, her latest performance report. "But I'm not asking for sympathy now. Look at my numbers. I processed more files in 2 weeks than most new hires do in a month. I stay late. I learn fast. I work harder than anyone because I know what's at stake." Charles started to speak, but Sarah wasn't finished. "You want to talk about precedent? Fine. Make this the precedent. Judge people by their work, not their circumstances. Because life can take everything from you in a heartbeat." "I know. It happened to me." The silence stretched. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Finally, the woman in red spoke. "Mr. Thompson, while Mrs. Johnson's story is moving, we still have concerns about company policy." "Noted." Mr. Thompson's voice was calm. "Now, let me share a story of my own." He stood, walking to the window. 30 years ago, a woman lived in her car with her son. She was smart, capable, but life had knocked her down. One day, she gathered her courage and walked into an office building. Asked for work. The CEO saw something in her worth taking a chance on. He turned back to the board. "That woman was my mother." "That CEO?" "Robert Miller, the founder of this company." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Miller believed in second chances. He believed talent could come from anywhere. That's not just company history, it's company policy. Check the original charter. Times have changed, Charles argued weakly. Have they? Look around this table. How many of us came from privilege? How many fought our way up? Mr. Thompson's gaze swept the room. Sarah Johnson isn't a charity case. She's a reminder of what this company stands for. He sat back down. "Now, if there are no more concerns about her qualifications, I believe we all have work to do." The board members filed out, avoiding Sarah's eyes. Only the woman in red paused at the door. "Mrs. Johnson." She hesitated. "My mother had cancer too. I'm sorry about yours." When they were alone, Sarah let out a shaky breath. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Don't thank me. You did this yourself. He smiled slightly. Though I have to admit, watching you put the board in their place was satisfying. I thought I was going to be fired. Fired? Sarah, I'm promoting you. She blinked. What? Executive Administrative Assistant. My previous one is retiring next month. The position needs someone organized, efficient, and most importantly, someone who isn't afraid to speak truth to power. Sarah's mind raced. The salary would be better. The benefits too. She could start saving for the children's education. There will be more meetings like this, Mr. Thompson warned. More people questioning your right to be here. I can handle it. He nodded. I know you can. That's why I hired you. Back at her cubicle, Jenny appeared with 2 coffee cups. So, she whispered. How bad was it? Sarah took a sip, savoring the warmth. I got promoted. Jenny's squeal drew stares. I knew it. Wait till I tell Mom. She's been worried sick about you all morning. Sarah thought of her neighbor's kindness, Jenny's friendship, Mr. Thompson's faith. The whispers hadn't stopped. Might never stop, but they mattered less now. That evening, she walked home with her head high. In her purse was paperwork for her promotion, health insurance cards for her children, and her first real paycheck in over a year. The apartment smelled like Jenny's mom's cooking when she opened the door. Her children's voices mixed with their neighbors, filling the space with life and warmth. Mama! Lisa ran to her, healthy and strong now. Miss Jenny brought ice cream to celebrate. Celebrate what? Your promotion, of course. Jenny's mom winked. News travels fast. Sarah looked around the room, at Tanya doing homework at their new second-hand table, at Marcus setting plates with careful pride, at Lisa's drawings covering the fridge. 2 weeks ago, they'd slept in an alley. Now, Mama, Tanya looked up. Are you crying? Happy tears, baby. Sarah wiped her eyes. Just happy tears. Later, after the celebrations and goodbyes, Sarah stood at her window again. The city lights seemed brighter somehow, like stars brought down to earth. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, the path ahead was clear, and she was ready to walk it. The morning sun streamed through real curtains, bought with Sarah's first paycheck, as she helped her children get ready for their first day of school. Lisa twirled in her new uniform, the pleated skirt swishing around her knees. Do I look okay? She asked for the 10th time. You look perfect. Sarah straightened Lisa's collar. The pneumonia had left no lasting effects. Her daughter's cheeks were rosy with health. Marcus emerged from his room, struggling with his tie. I can't make it work. Here. Tanya stepped in, her own uniform pristine. She fixed her brother's tie with practiced hands. You have to loop it like this. Sarah watched them, her heart full. 1 month had passed since that rainy night in the alley. 1 month of steady work, regular meals, and peaceful sleep. The changes in her children were remarkable. Everyone ready? She grabbed her briefcase, a gift from Jenny. Big day today. The walk to school took them past their old alley. Sarah felt Tanya tense beside her, but they didn't stop. That wasn't their life anymore. Remember, Sarah said at the school gates, I'll pick you up at 3. If anything happens, call Jenny or her mom, the children chorused. And we have lunch money, Marcus added proudly. And our emergency contacts are updated, Lisa finished. Sarah hugged each of them, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Other parents streamed past with their children, some giving curious looks at their emotional goodbyes. They'll be fine, Jenny said, appearing at Sarah's side. She'd insisted on being there for moral support. The school knows their situation. They'll watch out for them. Sarah nodded, watching until her children disappeared inside. I never thought I'd see this day again. Them in uniforms, carrying backpacks. Come on. Jenny linked arms with her. You have your own big day to worry about. The Thompson Industries building looked different now that Sarah worked directly for the CEO. Her new office, small but private, sat just outside Mr. Thompson's suite. The nameplate on her desk read, Sarah Johnson, Executive Administrative Assistant. Morning, Sarah. Susan called as she passed. Their relationship had evolved into mutual respect after the board meeting. Mr. Thompson needs the Miller Foundation proposals by 10. Sarah settled into her work routine, but her mind kept drifting to her children. Were they making friends? Did the other kids notice their circumstances? Her phone buzzed at noon, A text from Jenny's mom. Kids called during lunch break. All good. Stop worrying. Sarah smiled, turning back to her computer. The Miller Foundation proposals needed final touches before. Mrs. Johnson? She looked up to find the woman in the red blazer from the board meeting. Angela Chun, she learned, standing at her desk. Yes, Miss Chun? I've been reviewing your suggestions for the employee housing program. Angela's expression softened slightly. They're good. Really good. Would you be interested in joining the committee? Sarah blinked in surprise. Yes, I would. Excellent. We meet Thursdays at lunch. Angela hesitated. And Sarah? I'm sorry about how I acted in that meeting. You were doing your job. No, I was being prejudiced. It won't happen again. After Angela left, Mr. Thompson emerged from his office. See? Told you they'd come around. Sir? The board. The other executives. They're starting to see what I saw in that parking lot. He sat on the edge of her desk. How are the kids' first day? Nervous, but excited. Thank you for arranging the scholarships. The Miller Foundation exists for exactly this purpose. He smiled. Speaking of which, how are those proposals coming? The rest of the day passed quickly. Sarah finished the proposals, scheduled next week's meetings, and handled 3 minor crises before lunch. Her new position challenged her in ways her old insurance job never had. At 2:45, she packed up her things. Mr. Thompson had insisted she leave early for school pickup, at least for the first week. They need stability right now, he'd said. Work can wait. The schoolyard buzzed with activity as parents gathered at the gates. Sarah stood on tiptoe, scanning the crowds of uniformed children. Mama! Lisa burst from the building, running full tilt into Sarah's arms. Marcus followed more sedately, trying to look cool, but unable to hide his grin. How was it? Sarah asked, hugging them close. I made 2 friends. Lisa bounced on her toes. And my teacher says I'm good at math. The cafeteria food is weird, Marcus reported. But I got picked first for basketball at recess. Sarah looked for Tanya, finding her walking slowly with another girl. Her eldest expression was guarded, but Sarah saw the hint of a smile. This is Amy, Tanya said when they reached her. She's in my class. Nice to meet you, Amy. Sarah noticed the girls had the same book tucked under their arms, book club, English assignment. Tanya's smile grew. We're partners. They walked home together, the children chattering about their day. Sarah drank in every detail, storing them like precious gems. Their apartment welcomed them with familiar warmth. Sarah had scraped together enough for some basic furniture, a couch from a thrift store, a dining table that only wobbled slightly, beds for everyone. Homework first, she reminded them. Then we can celebrate. Celebrate what? Marcus asked, already pulling out his math book. Our new beginning. Jenny and her mother arrived with dinner, just as the children finished their homework. The small apartment filled with laughter and conversation. A toast. Jenny's mom raised her water glass. To fresh starts. Sarah looked around the table, at her children's bright faces, at the friends who'd become family, at the home they'd built from nothing. To fresh starts, she echoed. Later, tucking the children into their beds, real beds, with clean sheets and warm blankets, Sarah felt the magnitude of their journey hit her. Mama, Lisa called softly. Are we really going to stay here? Sarah sat on the edge of her daughter's bed. Yes, baby. This is our home now. Forever. Forever. In her own room, Sarah changed into pajamas, another first paycheck purchase. The night air carried the sounds of city life through her window, but they weren't threatening anymore. Her phone lit up with a text from Mr. Thompson. Board approved your housing program suggestions. Well done. Sarah smiled, typing back a thank you. 1 month ago, she'd been at rock bottom, praying for a miracle. Now she was the miracle for her children, for herself, and maybe someday for someone else who needed a chance. Outside, the city hummed its nighttime lullaby. Inside, her children slept safely in their beds. And Sarah Johnson, who had once been invisible, stood in the middle of her home and felt, finally, completely seen. 3 months into their new life, Sarah cooked dinner in their apartment while her children did homework at the dining table. Real cooking, not just opening cans or splitting pieces of bread. The smell of chicken soup filled the space, her mother's recipe, made from memory. Need help, Mama? Tanya looked up from her history book. Almost done. How's the homework coming? Lisa's helping Marcus with math, Tanya said. And Amy's coming over tomorrow to work on our science project. The changes in Tanya had been the most profound. The hard shell she'd built during their time on the streets was slowly cracking, revealing glimpses of the carefree girl she'd once been. The doorbell rang. Jenny's mom stood outside with a familiar envelope. It came, she said, handing it to Sarah. First savings account statement. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. The balance wasn't large, but it represented something massive, a future. Security. Hope. Smells good in here, Jenny's mom said, following Sarah to the kitchen. Your mother's recipe? Sarah nodded, stirring the soup. First time I've made it since she died. She'd be proud of you, you know. I hope so. Sarah wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Some days I still can't believe this is real. Mama, Marcus called from the table. I got an A on my history test. Sarah turned to see him, waving a paper triumphantly. His grades had improved dramatically since starting at the new school. All their grades had. That's wonderful, babies. She pinned the test to their achievement wall, a space by the front door covered in good grades, artwork, and other victories. The wall had started with Lisa's first math quiz after returning to school. Now it was a colorful testament to their recovery, each paper and drawing marking another step forward. Dinner's ready, Sarah announced. Marcus, set the table. Lisa, help your brother. Jenny's mom stayed for dinner, as she often did. The children shared stories from school between spoonfuls of soup. Amy's mom invited me for a sleepover next weekend, Tanya said hesitantly. Can I go? Sarah heard the unspoken fear in her daughter's voice, the worry that everything could disappear again, that separation meant loss. Of course you can. Sarah squeezed Tanya's hand. I'll talk to Amy's mom tomorrow. After dinner, Jenny stopped by with exciting news. Remember that data processing project I mentioned? She bounced on her toes. Mr. Thompson approved it. And he wants you involved in the planning? Me? Sarah was surprised. But I'm just his assistant. Just his assistant? Sarah, half the executives come to you for advice now. You've completely reorganized the filing system, streamlined the meeting schedules, and your employee housing program is changing lives. It was true. 3 other families had moved into company housing in the past month. Sarah had helped them settle in, knowing exactly what they needed. Speaking of work, Jenny continued. Mom said to tell you she's watching the kids tomorrow night. No arguments. Why? Because the team's taking you out to celebrate your 3-month work anniversary. Mr. Thompson's orders. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Sarah sat at their small desk paying bills. Another new experience, having regular bills to pay, having the money to pay them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Thompson. Board meeting tomorrow. Bring the Miller Foundation expansion plans. Sarah smiled, remembering how she'd once feared those meetings. Now she walked into the boardroom with confidence, her ideas respected, her voice heard. A noise from Lisa's room drew her attention. She found her youngest sitting by the window, looking at the stars. Can't sleep? Lisa shook her head. I was thinking about Grandma. Sarah sat beside her, pulling her close. What about her? Do you think she can see us? See that we're okay now. I think she can. Sarah's voice caught. I think she's been watching over us this whole time. I miss her. Me too, baby. Every day. They sat together, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Sarah remembered nights in the alley, holding her children close, praying for dawn. Now each night brought peaceful sleep. Each morning promised new opportunities. The next day at work, Sarah arrived early to prepare for the board meeting. Angela Chun caught her in the break room. Sarah, I wanted to run something by you. She pulled out a folder. We've been looking at expanding the employee assistance programs, maybe add childcare, educational support, like what Mr. Thompson did for us? Angela nodded. Exactly. Would you be willing to consult? Your experience, it could help us identify what families really need. Sarah thought of the other families in company housing, of all the people still struggling on the streets. I'd be honored. The board meeting went smoothly. Sarah presented the Miller Foundation expansion plans with quiet confidence. 3 months of proper meals and rest had erased the desperate look from her face, replaced it with determination. Excellent work, Mrs. Johnson. Charles, once her harshest critic, said afterward. The foundation will help twice as many people with these changes. That evening, her coworkers took her to a small restaurant near the office. Jenny made a silly speech about Sarah's transformation from parking lot vigilante to office superhero. To Sarah, the team toasted, who reminded us what this company stands for. At home, she found her children and Jenny's mom playing board games. The apartment rang with laughter. Real, unburdened laughter. "Mama!" Lisa ran to hug her. "We made you something." They led her to the achievement wall. In the center hung a new drawing. Stick figures of their family, standing in front of a building labeled home. "See?" Lisa pointed. "That's us. All better now." Sarah gathered her children close, breathing in the miracle of their presence, their health, their happiness. "All better," she agreed. Later, updating their budget with her latest paycheck, Sarah allowed herself to think about the future. College funds for the children. Maybe homeownership someday. Dreams that had seemed impossible 3 months ago now felt within reach. Her phone lit up with a family photo Jenny had taken at dinner. Sarah and her children, smiling without reservation, healing without fear. They made it, not just to safety, but to joy. And that was the greatest healing of all. 6 months to the day after Sarah first approached Mr. Thompson in the hospital parking lot, she stood in his office reviewing the morning schedule. "The Miller Foundation board meets at 10, she said, checking her tablet. "Then lunch with the new housing program families at 12. "Sarah," Mr. Thompson interrupted gently. "Sit down for a moment." She sat, noting the serious expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he continued, "about the foundation's leadership. Sir, I'm promoting you to Deputy Director of the Miller Foundation." Sarah's tablet slipped from her fingers. "What? You've already been doing half the work. The other families trust you. You understand their needs in a way none of us can." He smiled. "Plus, you're the only person who can tell the board no and make them like it. But what about my position here? You'll still be involved with company operations, but your focus will be the foundation, helping other families find their way back, like you did." Sarah thought of the 5 families now living in company housing, their children playing together after school. Thought of the new child care center being built, the education program starting next semester. "When do I start?" "There's a press conference at 2. We'll announce it then." He paused. "I invited some special guests." The morning passed in a blur. Sarah handled the foundation meeting with practiced ease, then helped serve lunch to the housing program families. Their children played with Lisa and Marcus while the adults talked about jobs, schools, and future plans. At 1:45, Jenny appeared at Sarah's office door. "Ready?" Everyone's waiting downstairs. The company's main lobby was packed with employees, reporters, and foundation beneficiaries. Sarah spotted her children in the front row with Jenny's mom, all dressed in their best clothes. Mr. Thompson took the podium first. "6 months ago, a woman approached me in a parking lot," he began. "She didn't ask for money or handouts. She asked for a chance." Sarah listened as he told their story. Not the sanitized corporate version, but the real one. The rain, the fever, the desperate prayer that had brought them together. The Miller Foundation was built on the belief that talent and determination can come from anywhere, he continued. Sarah Johnson proves that every day, which is why I'm proud to announce her appointment as our new deputy director. The applause was deafening. Sarah saw Tanya beaming, Lisa jumping up and down, Marcus trying to look cool but failing. Then Mr. Thompson said, "But before Sarah takes the podium, there's someone else who'd like to speak." An elderly man in a wheelchair was helped onto the stage. Sarah's heart stopped. "For those who don't know me," the man said, his voice wavering but strong, "I'm Robert Miller. 30 years ago, I gave a chance to a young woman living in her car with her son. That son grew up to be Richard Thompson." The room fell silent. "Today, I watched another woman walk the same path. Sarah," he turned to her, "you remind me so much of Richard's mother. The same fire, the same determination to build a better life." Sarah stepped up to the podium, tears threatening to fall. "6 months ago, I stood in an alley watching my daughter burn with fever," she began. "I thought we'd lost everything. But we hadn't lost the most important things: hope, dignity, the will to work for a better future." She saw Jenny wiping her eyes in the crowd. Angela Chun nodding encouragingly. The Miller Foundation gave me more than a job. It gave my children their mother back. Gave us a home, a community, a future. She smiled through her tears. Now it's my turn to help others find their way home. After the ceremony, Sarah hugged her children close. Does this mean you're famous now? Marcus asked, making everyone laugh. It means Mama's going to help other families like she helped us, Tanya explained. Her voice held pride, understanding, and most wonderfully peace. That evening, they made a special trip. The cemetery was quiet in the golden light, the fresh flowers on her mother's grave bright against the stone. Hi, Mama, Sarah said softly. Sorry it's been a while. We've been busy. She told her mother everything. The promotion, the foundation, the children's accomplishments. Told her about their apartment, their community, their healing. I kept my promise, she whispered. I took care of them. And somehow, along the way, we found our way back to joy. Lisa placed a drawing on the grave. Their family portrait, now including a smiling angel watching from above. That's Grandma, she explained to her siblings. Making sure we're okay. They walked home through familiar streets, past their old alley. A new family had taken shelter there, their situation painfully familiar. Sarah stopped, pulling out her business card. Here, she handed it to the startled mother. Come see me tomorrow. There's a place for you in our housing program. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Why would you help us? Because 6 months ago, someone helped me. Sarah smiled. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you. At home, they celebrated with a special dinner. Jenny and her mother came, of course. So did Amy and her parents and several families from the housing program. Their small apartment overflowed with love, laughter, and hope. Later, Sarah stood at her window, the same window where she'd once counted her meager blessings. Now she counted different things, her children's achievements, their growing savings account, the families they'd helped. Mama, Tanya joined her at the window. I'm proud of you. Sarah pulled her close. I'm proud of us. All of us. They watched the city lights together, mother and daughter, survivors and victors. You know what I think? Tanya said softly. I think we were never really homeless. What do you mean? Home isn't just a place. It's people. It's love. It's believing things can get better. She looked up at her mother. We carried our home with us the whole time. We just needed help remembering how to build it again. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, marveling at her wisdom. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. Inside, her children's laughter mixed with the voices of their chosen family. They had come full circle, from darkness to light, from despair to hope, from lost to found. And in the end, they had built more than a home. They had built a future,